faithful when no one is watching. Two men sat near the edge of the marketplace, sharing a meal while the noise of the city moved around them. They had known one another for years. Both served in prominent households. Both had masters who had traveled away together on business, leaving each man with responsibility until their return. Food needed to be distributed. Servants needed direction. Accounts needed to be watched. Each house depended on someone remembering that the house still belonged to the master, even while the master was away. At first, the conversation was ordinary. They talked about the burden of managing people, the strain of keeping order, and the difficulty of making sure everyone received what they needed at the proper time. The first man understood all of it. He knew what it was to wake before others, think through the day's needs, and carry authority that did not truly belong to him. But slowly, his friend's tone changed. He laughed about how long his master had been gone. He spoke of the better food he had begun enjoying from the storerooms, the wine he had allowed himself, and the sharper orders he had learned to give when other servants resisted. He spoke of the house almost as if it had become his. Not openly, not in those words, but the thought sat beneath everything he said. The first man felt something tighten in him. His friend noticed and smiled. "You worry too much," he said. "Your master is not here. Mine is not either. What is the point of being trusted with a great house if we never enjoy what is in it?" The words stayed in the air longer than they should have. The first man looked down at the bread in his hands. Part of him was troubled. Another part of him, quieter and less willing to be named, wondered whether his friend was right. Had he been too restrained, too careful, too burdened by duty when the master was not even there to see it? He had tried to manage the household well. He had tried to remember that authority entrusted was not the same as authority owned. But there was a pull in his friend's words, a pull toward ease, importance, and using what had been placed in his hands for himself. Before he could answer, the sound of a nearby crowd drew their attention. Jesus was teaching. People had gathered close enough that his words carried across the marketplace. Some stood along the road. Others leaned against stone walls. A few had stopped mid-task, caught by the authority with which he spoke. Jesus had been speaking of watchfulness, of the Son of Man coming at an hour no one expected. Then he asked a question that seemed to reach straight across the marketplace and settle between the two servants. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? Matthew chapter 24, verse 45. The first man went still. A servant set over a household, food at the proper time, a master away. This was not distant language. It was the shape of his own life. Jesus did not begin with the wicked servant. He began with the faithful one, a servant entrusted with the master's household, not to use it, not to claim it, not to build his own name within it, but to care for it according to the master's will. That mattered. The faithful servant did not confuse trust with ownership. He did not treat the master's absence as permission. He understood that the house was still the master's house, the food was still the master's provision, and the servants were still the master's servants. Then Jesus said, "Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes." Matthew chapter 24, verse 46. So doing, not merely intending, not merely planning to restore order before anyone noticed. The faithful servant was found doing what the master had entrusted him to do. He was faithful when the master was not visible. He acted in the house as though the master's authority remained present, because in truth it did. Faithfulness was not proven only in the presence of the master. Faithfulness was revealed in the master's absence. Jesus continued, "Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions." Matthew chapter 24, verse 47. There was honor in that, not because the servant seized more, but because he was faithful with what had already been placed into his hands. He cared for the house in a way that reflected the master's heart. As the first man listened, an older truth stirred beneath the story. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Human beings were made to bear the image of God. We were made to represent him within his creation, to reflect his goodness, his care, his order, and his righteous rule. Not even the angels were given that particular calling. Now, as Jesus spoke of a servant set over a household, that truth became painfully practical. To bear the image of the master was to act in a way that showed the household what the master was like. The faithful servant did that. He fed, he cared, he remained in his place. He used authority as stewardship, not as self-exaltation. Then Jesus turned the parable. But if that wicked servant says to himself, "My master is delayed," Matthew chapter 24, verse 48, the first man felt his friend shift beside him. Jesus called him wicked, not tired, not misunderstood, not merely overwhelmed. Wicked. The word had weight because the servant's actions had weight. This was not a man struggling to complete a difficult task. This was a servant who used the master's delay as permission to betray the master's trust. And Jesus showed where it began. He says to himself, "My master is delayed." The first man heard those words and thought of the conversation that had just taken place at the table. Your master is not here. What is the point of being trusted with a great house if we never enjoy what is in it? The wicked servant did not begin by denying that he had a master. He began by treating the master's delay as though it loosened the master's claim. But the master's absence did not remove his authority. The master's delay did not transfer ownership. The master's trust did not give the servant permission to rule as though the house belonged to him. Jesus continued and begins to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards. Matthew chapter 24, verse 49. There was no way to soften it. He beat those he was supposed to feed. He abused those he was supposed to care for. He used entrusted authority to dominate the very people the master had placed under his protection. And while they suffered, he indulged himself. The first man looked again at his friend. His friend was no longer smiling. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The parable had gathered up the whole morning and placed it under the eyes of God. This was not simply a lesson about responsibility. It was a revelation of the master's heart. The master cared about his household. The master cared about how his servants were treated. The master cared whether authority was used to feed or to beat. The master cared whether his absence was honored with faithfulness or exploited through wickedness. This was not a motivational speech. This was royal instruction. Jesus was teaching his servants what the king expects while he is away. The first man understood something then that he had not seen as clearly before. The wicked servant had not ceased to be called to represent the master. He had betrayed the calling. He had taken the place of a servant and acted like a lord. He had turned the master's household into a stage for his own appetite, power, and preeminence. The faithful servant bore the master's image in the house. The wicked servant misrepresented him, and the master would return. Jesus said, "The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know." Matthew chapter 24, verse 50. The first man swallowed hard. Delay feels long until it ends. Absence feels safe until the door opens. The wicked servant may have thought there would be time to restore order, sober himself, quiet the bruised servants, and put everything back in place before footsteps sounded at the gate. But the master came when he did not expect him. Jesus finished the warning with terrible clarity, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Matthew chapter 24, verse 51. No one near them spoke lightly after that. The first man looked at his friend again. What had sounded like confidence only moments earlier now felt like folly. What had sounded like freedom now sounded like rebellion. What had sounded like harmless enjoyment now stood under the judgment of the king. His friend tried to recover himself. He took a drink and gave a weak laugh, though his voice had lost some of its strength. "You are taking this too seriously," he said. "There is still time. Our masters will not return today. If anything needs to be put right, we can put it right before they come." The first man looked at him. There it was again. Still time. Not denial of the master. Not rejection of accountability. Just the assumption that accountability would come later after he had finished doing what he wanted. He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, two servants came running through the marketplace. They were breathless, waving their arms, pointing toward the road. "They are coming," one of them called. "Your masters are returning." the first man turned. In the distance, dust was rising along the road. For a moment, everything seemed to narrow to that small cloud forming beyond the edge of the marketplace. The sound of merchants faded, the clatter of dishes, the movement of animals, the voices of travelers, all of it seemed to pull away as the road became the only thing that mattered. His friend's face changed. All the words drained out of him. The meal sat unfinished between them. A moment earlier, he had sounded certain, relaxed, almost amused by accountability. Now he stared toward the road as though the dust itself had become a witness against him. There had been no warning bell, no convenient space to repair what had been misused or hide what had been done. The return had simply arrived. The first man looked toward the road, then back toward the place where Jesus had been teaching. The warning no longer felt distant. It no longer belonged to some future day he could arrange at his convenience. The master's return had not created the truth. It had revealed what had already been true. That is what delay does. It reveals allegiance. It reveals whether we understand that the house still belongs to the master. It reveals whether we see people as those entrusted to our care or as tools for our comfort. It reveals whether we bear the image of the king or use his absence to seek a throne for ourselves. Jesus is our king. Jesus is our master. He has gone away, but he has not surrendered his authority. He has entrusted his household to his servants, and he has told us what faithfulness looks like. We are not asked to invent the master's expectations or soften his warning. He has already shown us the difference between the faithful servant and the wicked one. Faithfulness is not simply avoiding open rebellion while the master is away. It is continuing to represent him in the household he loves. It is caring for what belongs to him, serving those entrusted to us, using influence as stewardship, and remembering that every room in the house is still his. This does not mean we never rest. The master is not cruel. Jesus is gentle and lowly in heart. But there is a difference between resting under the care of the master and taking a vacation from faithfulness to him. There is a difference between receiving refreshment from the Lord and using his delay as permission to indulge the flesh, neglect his people, or treat his household as though it belongs to us. The question is not what we would do if Jesus stood visibly before us. In that moment, every knee would bow, every mouth would be silenced, every servant would know who owns the house. The question is what we do while he is away. What do we do with the people he has entrusted to our care? What do we do with the authority, influence, time, resources, words, and opportunities he has placed in our hands? Do we feed or do we beat? Do we serve or do we use? Do we reflect the master or do we betray his trust? The faithful servant is faithful because the master is worthy, whether his return feels near or delayed. That is allegiance. That is integrity. That is image-bearing faithfulness. And one day the delay will end. The master will return, not as a possibility, but as a certainty. And when he comes, he will not need us to explain what kind of servants we meant to become. He will know what kind of servants we have been. As you sit with this teaching today, consider what has been entrusted to your care while the master is away. Where has Jesus placed people, responsibility, influence, or opportunity into our hands? Not so we can claim them for ourselves, but so we can reflect his heart through faithful service. Where might we be tempted to treat delay as permission to loosen our allegiance, misuse what belongs to him, or seek a place of preeminence that belongs only to the king? And what would it look like for us to be found so doing when the master comes, quietly faithful, steadily serving, bearing his image when no one is watching? If you're willing, share your reflections or questions in the comments so we can learn and walk this journey together.